Hello and welcome to Huckleberry Finn chapters 34 through 36. Here's chapter 34. We stopped talking and got to thinking. By and by, Tom says, "Looky here, Huck. What fools we are not to think of it before. I bet I know where Jim is." "No, where?" "In that hut down by the ash hopper. Why, looky here. When we was at dinner, didn't you see an N-word man go in there with some victuals, some food?" "Yes." "What do you think the victuals was for?" "For a dog." "So did I." "Well, it weren't for a dog." "Why?" "Because part of it was watermelon." "So it was. I noticed it." "Well, it does beat all that I never thought about a dog not eating watermelon. It shows how a body can see and don't see at the same time." "Well, the N-word unlocked the padlock when he went in, and he locked it again when he come out. He fetched Uncle a key about the time we got up from table. Same key, I bet. Watermelon shows man, lock shows prisoner, and it ain't likely there's two prisoners on such a little plantation where the people's all so kind and good. Jim's the prisoner. All right, I'm glad we found it out detective fashion. I wouldn't give shucks for any other way. Now you work your mind and study out a plan to steal Jim, and I will study out one too, and we'll take the one we like the best." So there's the answer to number one about how they figured out where Jim was being held. What a head for just a boy to have. If I had Tom Sawyer's head, I wouldn't trade it off to be a duke, nor mate of a steamboat, nor clown in a circus, nor nothing I can think of. I went to thinking out a plan, but only just to be doing something. I know very well where the right plan was going to come from. Pretty soon Tom says, "Ready?" "Yes," I says. "All right, bring it out." "Well, my plan is this," I says. "We can easy find out if it's Jim in there, then get up my canoe tomorrow night and fetch my raft over from the island. Then the first dark night that comes, steal the key out of the old man's breeches after he goes to bed and shove off down the river on the raft with Jim, hiding daytimes and running nights the way me and Jim used to do before. Wouldn't that plan work?" "Work? Well, certainly it would work like a rat's a fighting, but it's too blame simple. There ain't nothing to it. What's the good of a plan that ain't no more trouble than that? It's as mild as goose milk. Why, Huck, it wouldn't make no more talk than breaking into a soap factory." There's your answer to number two about Huck's plan and what Tom doesn't like about it. I never said nothing because I weren't expecting nothing different, but I knowed mighty well that whatever he got his plan ready, it wouldn't have none of them objections to it. And it didn't. He told me what it was, and I see in a minute it was worth 15 of mine for style and would make Jim just as free a man as mine would, and maybe get us all killed besides. So I was satisfied and said we would waltz in on it. I needn't tell what it was here because I knowed it wouldn't stay the way it was. I knowed he would be changing it around every which way as we went along and heaving in new bulliness whenever he got a chance. And that is what he done. Well, one thing was dead sure, and that was that Tom Sawyer was in earnest and he was actually going to help steal that N-word out of slavery. That was the thing that was too many for me. Here was a boy that was respectable and well brung up and had character to lose, and folks at home that had characters, and he was bright and not leather-headed and knowing and not ignorant and not mean but kind, and yet here he was without any more pride or rightness or feeling than to stoop to this business and make himself ashamed and his family ashamed before everybody. I couldn't understand it, no way at all. It was outrageous, and I knowed I ought to just up and tell him so and be his true friend and let him quit the thing right where he was and save himself. And I did start to tell him, but he shut me up. So again, Huckins just can't believe that Tom is going to go down and do such a low-down thing as stealing a slave, helping the slave escape. Can't believe Tom would bring shame to himself this way. Tom knows something that Huck doesn't. We'll get to it later. Tom says, "Don't you reckon I know what I'm about? Don't I generally know what I'm about?" "Yes." "Didn't I say I was going to help steal the N-word?" "Yes." "Well then." That's all he said, and that's all I said. It weren't no use to say any more because he said he'd do a thing. When he said he'd do a thing, he always done it. But I couldn't make out how he was willing to go into this thing, so I just let it go and never bothered no more about it. If he was bound to have it so, I couldn't help it. When we got home, the house was all dark and still, so we went on down to the hut by the ash hopper for to examine it. We went through the yard so as to see what the hounds would do. They knowed us. It didn't make no more noise than country dogs is always doing when anything comes by in the night. When we got to the cabin, we took a look at the front and the two sides, and on the side I weren't acquainted with, which was the north side, we found a square window hole up tolerable high with just one stout board nailed across it. I says, "Here's the ticket. This hole's big enough for Jim to get through if we wrench off the board." Tom says, "It's as simple as tit-tat-toe 3 in a row and as easy as playing hooky. I should hope we can find a way that's a little more complicated than that, Huck Finn." "Well then," I says, How will it do to saw him out the way I'd done before I was murdered that time? That's more like, he says. It's real mysterious and troublesome and good, he says. But I bet we can find a way that's twice as long. There ain't no hurry. Let's keep on looking around. Betwixt the hut and the fence on the backside was a lean-to that joined the hut at the eaves and was made out of planks, so another little shelter. It was as long as the hut, but narrow, only about 6 foot wide. The door to it was at the south end and was padlocked. Tom, he went to the soap kettle and searched around and fetched back the iron thing they lift the lid with, so he took it and prized out one of the staples. The chain fell down, and we opened the door and went in and shut it and struck a match, and see, the shed was only built against the cabin and hadn't no connection with it. There weren't no floor to the shed, nor nothing in it but some old rusty played-out hoes and spades and picks and crippled plow. The match went out, and so did we, and shoved in the staple again, and the door was locked as good as ever. Tom was joyful. He says, now we're all right. We'll dig him out. It'll take about a week. There's your answer to number 3, Tom's new and much more complicated and arduous plan for rescuing Jim. Then we started for the house, and I went in the back door. You only have to pull a buckskin latch string. They don't fasten the doors. But that weren't romantical enough for Tom Sawyer. No way would do him, but he must climb up the lightning rod. But after he got up halfway about 3 times, he missed fire and fell every time. And the last time most busted his brains out. He thought he'd got to give it up, but after he was rested, he allowed he would give her one more turn for luck, and this time he made the trip. In the morning, we was up at break of day and down to the N-word cabins to pet the dogs and make friends with the N-word that fed Jim, if it was Jim that was being fed. The N-words were just getting through breakfast and starting for the fields, and Jim's N-word was piling up a tin pan with bread and meat and things, whilst the others was leaving. The key come from the house. This N-word had a good-natured, chuckle-headed face, and his wool was all tied up little bunches with thread. His hair. That was to keep witches off. He said the witches was pestering him awful these nights and making him see all kinds of strange things and hear all kinds of strange words and noises, and he didn't believe he was ever witched so long before in his life. He got so worked up and got to running on so about his troubles, he forgot all about what he'd been going to do. So Tom says, what's the victuals for? Going to feed the dogs? The N-word kind of smiled around gradually over his face like when you have a brickbat in a mud puddle, and he says, yes, Master Sid, a dog. Remember, Tom is Sid. Curious dog, too. Does you want to go and look at him? Yes. I hunched Tom. He kind of huddled to Tom and whispers, you going right here in the daybreak? That weren't the plan. No, it weren't, but it's the plan now. So drat him, we went along, but I didn't like it much. When we got in, we couldn't hardly see anything. It was so dark, but Jim was there, sure enough, and could see us, and he sings out, why, Huck, and good land, ain't that Mr. Tom? I just knowed how it would be. I just expected it. I didn't know nothing to do, and if I had, I couldn't have done it, because that N-word busted in and says, why, the gracious sakes, do we know you gentlemen? We could see pretty well now. Tom looked at the N-word steady and kind of wondering and says, does who know us? Why, this here runaway N-word. I don't reckon he does, but what put that in your head? What put it there? Didn't he just this minute sing out like he knowed you? Tom says in a puzzled up kind of way, well, that's mighty curious. Who sung out? When did he sing out? What did he sing out? He turns to me perfectly calm and says, did you hear anybody sing out? Of course, there weren't nothing to be said but the one thing. So I says, no, I ain't heard nobody say nothing. Then he turns to Jim and looks him over like he never seen him before and says, did you sing out? No, sir, says Jim. I ain't said nothing, sir. Not a word? No, sir, I ain't said a word. Did you ever see us before? No, sir, not as I knows on. So Tom turns to the N-word, which was looking wild and distressed, and says, kind of severe, what do you reckon's the matter with you anyway? What made you think somebody sung out? There's answer number 4 about how they make up for the fact that Jim yells their names when they come in. Oh, it's the dad-blamed witches, sir, and I wished I was dead, I do. They's always at it, sir, and they do most kill me. They scares me so. Please don't tell nobody about it, sir. Old Moss Silas, he'll scold me because he say they ain't no witches. I just wish to goodness he was here now. Then what would he say? I just bet he couldn't find no way to get around it this time. But it always just so. People that sought stays sought. They won't looking at nothing find out for themselves. And when you find out and tell them about it, they don't believe you. Tom gave him a dime and said we wouldn't tell nobody, and told him to buy some more thread to tie his wool up with, and then looked at Jim and says, I wonder if Uncle Silas is going to hang this N-word. If I was to catch an N-word that was ungrateful enough to run away, I wouldn't give him up. I'd hang him. And whilst the N-word stepped to the door to look at the dime and bite it to see if it was good, he whispers to Jim and says, "Don't ever let on to know us. And if you hear any digging going on nights, it's us. We're going to set you free." Jim only had time to grab us by the hand and squeeze it. Then the N-word come back, and we said we'd come again sometime if the N-word wanted us to. And he said he would, more particular if it was dark, because the witches went for him mostly in the dark. And it was good to have folks around then. That's the end of chapter 34. Here's chapter 35. It would be most an hour yet till breakfast, so we left and struck down in the woods because Tom said we got to have some light to see how to dig by it. A lantern makes too much and might get us into trouble. What we must have is a lot of them rotten chunks. It's called foxfire and just makes a soft kind of glow when you lay them in a dark place. We fetched an armful and hid it in the woods and sat down to rest, and Tom says, kind of dissatisfied, "Blame it, this whole thing is just as easy and awkward as it can be. And so it makes it so rotten difficult to get up a difficult plan. There ain't no watchman to be drugged. Now there ought to be a watchman. There ain't even a dog to give a sleeping mixture to. And there's Jim chained by one leg with a 10-foot chain to the leg of his bed. While all you have to do is lift up the bedstead and slip off the chain. And Uncle Silas, he trusts everybody, sends the key to the pumpkin-headed N-word and don't send nobody to watch the N-word. Jim could have got out that window hole before this, only there wouldn't be no use trying to travel with a 10-foot chain on his leg. Why, drat it, Huck, it's the stupidest arrangement I ever see. You got to invent all the difficulties." "Well, we can't help it. We got to do the best we can with the materials we've got. Anyhow, there's one thing. There's more honor in getting him out through a lot of difficulties and dangers when there ain't no..." Just happened. Power went. When there weren't one of them furnished to you by the people who it wasn't their duty to furnish them, and you had to contrive them all out of your own head. Now look at just that one thing of the lantern. When you come down to the cold facts, we simply got to let on that a lantern's resky. Why, we could work with a torchlight procession if we wanted to, I believe. Now, whilst I think of it, we got to hunt up something to make a saw out of the first chance we get. What do we want of a saw? What do we want of it? Ain't we got to saw the leg of Jim's bed off so as to get the chain loose? Why, you just said a body could lift up the bedstead and slip the chain off. So here's number 5. There's a whole bunch of stuff that he's making difficult about this. "Well, if that ain't just like you, Huck Finn, you can get up the infant schooliest ways of going at a thing. Why, ain't you ever read any books at all? Baron Trenck, nor Casanova, nor Benvenuto Cellini, nor Henry the Fourth, nor none of them heroes? Or whoever heard of getting a prisoner loose in such an old matey way as that? No, the way all the best authorities does is to saw the bed leg in two and leave it just so, and swallow the sawdust so it can't be found, and put some dirt and grease around the sawed place so the very keenest seneskull can't see no sign of its being sawed and thinks the bed leg is perfectly sound. Then the night you're ready, fetch the leg a kick, down she goes, slip off your chain, and there you are, nothing to do but hit your rope ladder or the battlements, shin down it, break your leg in the moat, because a rope ladder is 19 foot too short, you know. Then there's your horses and your trusty vassals, and they scoop you up and fling you across the saddle, and away you go to your native Languedoc or Navarre or wherever it is. It's gaudy, Huck. I wish there was a moat in this cabin. If we get time out of the escape, we'll dig one." I says, "What do we want of a moat when we're going to snake him out from under the cabin?" But he never heard me. He had forgot me and everything else. He had his chin in his hand thinking. Pretty soon he sighs and shakes his head and then sighs again and says, "No, it wouldn't do. There ain't necessity enough for it." "For what?" I says. "Why, to saw Jim's leg off," he says. "Good land," I says. "Why, there ain't no necessity for it. And what would you want to saw his leg off for anyway?" You can stop and answer number 6 about all the parts of this plan that are unnecessary and or cruel. Oh, my lights went off. "Well, some of the best authorities has done it. They couldn't get the chain off, so they just cut their hand off and shoved. And a leg would be better still. But we got to let that go. There ain't necessity enough in this case. And besides, Jim's an N-word and wouldn't understand the reasons for it and how it's the custom in Europe. So we'll let it go. But there's one thing. He can have a rope ladder. We can tear up our sheets and make him a rope ladder easy enough. And we can send it to him in a pie. It's mostly done that way, and I've ate worse pies." "Why, Tom Sawyer, how you talk?" I says. "Jim ain't got no use for a rope ladder." "He has got use for it. How you talk, you better say. You don't know nothing about it. He's got to have a rope ladder. They all do." "What in the nation can he do with it?" "Do with it? He can hide it in his bed, can't he? That's what they all do, and he's got to too. Huck, you don't ever seem to want to do anything that's regular. You want to be starting something fresh all the time. Suppose he don't do nothing with it. Ain't it there in his bed for a clue after he's gone? And don't you reckon they'll want clues? Of course they will. And you wouldn't want to leave them any? That would be a pretty howdy-do, wouldn't it? I never heard of such a thing. Well, I says, if it's in the regulations and he's got to have it, all right, let him have it, because I don't wish to go back on no regulations. But there's one thing, Tom Sawyer, if we go tearing up our sheets to make Jim a rope ladder, we're going to get in trouble with Aunt Sally, just as sure as you're born. Now, the way I look at it, a hickory bark ladder don't cost nothing and don't waste nothing, and is just as good to load up a pie with and hide in a straw tick, hide in the mattress, as any rag ladder you can start. And as for Jim, he ain't no experience, so he don't care what kind of Oh, shucks, Huck Finn. If I was as ignorant as you, I'd keep still. That's what I'd do. Whoever heard of a state prisoner escaping by a hickory bark ladder? Why, it's perfectly ridiculous. Well, all right, Tom, fix it your own way. But if you'll take my advice, you'll let me borrow a sheet off of the clothesline. And there's your answer to number 7. He said that would do. And I give him another idea, and he says, borrow a shirt too. What do we want of a shirt, Tom? Want it for Jim to keep a journal on. Journal your granny. Jim can't write. Suppose he can't write. He can make marks on the shirt, can he? If we make him a pen out of an old pewter spoon or a piece of old iron barrel hoop. Why, Tom, we can pull a feather out of a goose and make him a better one, and quicker too. Prisoners don't have geese running around the dungeon keep to pull pens out of, you muggins. They always make their pens out of the hardest, toughest, troublesomest piece of old brass candlestick or something like that they can get their hands on. And it takes them weeks and weeks and months to file it out too, because they've got to do it by rubbing it on the wall. They wouldn't use a goose quill if they had it. It ain't regular. Well then, what do we make him the ink out of? Many makes it out of iron rust and tears, but that's the common sort in women. The best authorities uses their own blood. Jim can do that. And when he wants to send any little common, ordinary, mysterious message to let the world know where he's captivated, he can write it on the bottom of a tin plate with a fork and throw it out of the window. The Iron Mask always done that, and it's a blame good way, too. Jim ain't got no tin plates. They feed him in a pan. That ain't anything. We can get him some. Can't nobody read his plates. That ain't got nothing to do with it, Huck Finn. All he's got to do is write on the plate and throw it out. You don't have to be able to read it. Why, half the time you can't read anything a prisoner writes on a tin plate or anywhere else. Well, then, what's the sense in wasting the plates? Why, blame it all, it ain't the prisoner's plates. But it's somebody's plates, ain't it? Well, supposing it is, what does the prisoner care who's... He broke off there because we heard the breakfast horn blowing, so we cleared out for the house. Along during that morning, I borrowed a sheet and a white shirt off of the clothesline, and I found an old sack and put them in it, and we went down and got the foxfire and put that in too. I called it borrowing because that's what Pap always called it, but Tom said it weren't borrowing, it was stealing. He said he was representing prisoners, and prisoners don't care how they get a thing, so they get it, and nobody don't blame them for it either. It ain't no crime in a prisoner to steal a thing he needs to get away with, Tom said. It's his right, and so as long as we was representing a prisoner, we had a perfect right to steal anything on this place we had the least use for to get ourselves out of prison with. He said if we weren't prisoners, it would be a very different thing, and nobody but a mean, ornery person would steal when he weren't a prisoner. So we would steal everything that there was come handy, and yet he made a mighty fuss one day after that when I stole a watermelon out of the N-word patch and eat it. He made me go and give the N-words a dime without telling him that what it was for. Tom said that what he meant was we could steal anything we needed. Well, I says I needed the watermelon. He said I didn't need it to get out of prison with. That's where the difference was. He said if I'd have wanted to take it to hide a knife in and smuggle it to Jim to kill the Seneschal with, it would have been all right. So I let it go with that, though I couldn't see no advantage of my representing a prisoner if I had to sit down and chaw over a lot of gold leaf distinctions like that every time I see a chance to hog a watermelon. And there's your answer to number 8. Well, as I was saying, we waited that morning until everybody was settled down to business, which nobody inside around the yard. Then Tom, he carried the sack into the lean-to whilst I stood off a piece to keep watch. By and by, he come out, and we went and sat down in the woodpile to talk. He says, everything's all right now except tools, and that's easy fixed. Tools? I says, yes. Tools for what? Why, to dig with. We ain't going to gnaw them out, are we? Ain't them old crippled picks and things in there good enough to dig an N-word out with? I says. He turns on me looking pitying enough to make a body cry and says, Huck Finn, did you ever hear of a prisoner having picks and shovels and all the modern conveniences in his wardrobe to dig himself out with? Now, I want to ask you, if you got any reasonableness in you at all, what kind of a show would that give him to be a hero? Why, they might as well lend him the key and be done with it. Picks and shovels. Why they wouldn't furnish them to a king? Well then, I says, if we don't want the picks and shovels, what do we want? A couple of case knives, like little butter knives, basically. To dig the foundation out from under that cabin with? Yes. Confound it, it's foolish, Tom. It don't make no difference how foolish it is. It's the right way, and it's the regular way, and there ain't no other way that I ever heard of, and I've read all the books that gives any information about those things. They always dig out with a case knife, and not through the dirt, mind you. Generally, it's through solid rock, and it takes them weeks and weeks and weeks and forever and ever. Why, look at one of them prisoners in the bottom dungeon of Castle Deef in the harbor of Marseille that dug himself out that way. How long was he at it, you reckon? I don't know. Well, guess. I don't know, a month and a half? 37 years, and he come out in China. That's the kind. I wish the bottom of this fortress was solid rock. So there's answer to number 9, Tom's fantasies here, things he's read. Jim don't know nobody in China. What's that got to do with it? Neither did that other fellow. You're always wandering off on a side issue. Why can't you stick to the main point? All right, I don't care where he comes out, just so he comes out, and Jim don't either, I reckon. But there's one thing anyway. Jim's too old to be dug out with a case knife. He won't last. Yes, he will last too. You don't reckon it's going to take 37 years to dig out through a dirt foundation, do you? How long will it take, Tom? Well, we can't risk being as long as we ought to, because it mayn't take very long for Uncle Silas to hear from down there by New Orleans. He'll hear Jim ain't from there. Then his next move will be to advertise Jim or something like that. So we can't risk being as long digging him out as we ought to. By rights, I reckon we ought to be a couple of years, but we can't. Things being so uncertain, what I recommend is this, that we really dig right in as quick as we can, and after that, we let on to ourselves that we was at it 37 years. Then we can snatch him out and rush him away the first time there's an alarm. Yes, I reckon that'll be the best way. There's answer number 10. It's about Uncle Silas and what he might do when he figures out that Jim isn't from New Orleans, and that's why they have to speed up the rescue just a tad. Now, there's sense in that, I says. Letting on don't cost nothing. Letting on means pretending. Letting on don't cost nothing. Letting on ain't no trouble. And if it's any object, I don't mind letting on. We was at it 150 year. Wouldn't strain me none after I got my hand in, so I'll mosey along now and steal a couple of case knives. Smouch 3, he says. We want one to make a saw out of. Tom, if it ain't unregular and irreligious to suggest it, I says, there's an old rusty saw blade around yonder sticking under the weatherboard and behind the smokehouse. He looked kind of weary and discouraged like and says, it ain't no use to try to learn you nothing, Huck. Run along and smouch the knives, 3 of them. So I done it. That's the end of chapter 35. Here's chapter 36. As soon as we reckoned everybody was asleep that night, we went down the lightning rod and shut ourselves up in the lean-to and got out our pile of foxfire and went to work. We cleared everything out of the way about 4 or 5 foot along the middle of the bottom log. Tom said we was right behind Jim's bed now, and we dig in under it, and when we got through, there couldn't be nobody in the cabin ever knew there was any hole there because Jim's counterpin hung down most to the ground, and you'd have to raise it up and look under to see the hole. So we dug and dug with the case knives till most midnight, and then we was dog tired, and our hands was blistered, and yet you couldn't see we'd done anything hardly. At last I says, this ain't no 37-year job. This is a 38-year job, Tom Sawyer. He never said nothing. But he sighed, and pretty soon he stopped digging, and then for a good little while, I knowed he was thinking. Then he says, ain't no use, Huck. It ain't going to work. If we was prisoners, it would, because then we'd have as many years as we wanted in no hurry, and we wouldn't get but a few minutes to dig every day while they was changing watches, and so our hands wouldn't get blistered, and we could keep it up right along year in and year out and do it right and the way it ought to be done. But we can't fool along. We got to rush. We ain't got no time to spare. If we was to put another night this way, we'd have to knock off for a week and let our hands get well. Couldn't touch a case knife with them sooner. Well then, what are we going to do, Tom? I'll tell you, it ain't right, and it ain't moral, and I wouldn't like it to get out, but there ain't only but just the one way. We got to dig him out with the picks and let on that it's case knives. Pretend it's case knives. Now you're talking, I says. Your head gets leveler and leveler all the time, Tom Sawyer, I says. Picks is the thing, moral or no moral, and as for me, I don't care shucks for the morality of it nohow. When I start in to steal an N-word or a watermelon or a Sunday school book, I ain't no ways particular how it's done, just so it's done. What I want is my N-word, or what I want is my watermelon, or what I want is my Sunday school book, and if a pick's the handiest thing, That's the thing I'm going to dig that N-word or that watermelon or that Sunday school book out with, and I don't give a dead rat for what the authorities thinks about it another. Well, he says, there is excuse for picks and letting on in a case like this. If it weren't so, I wouldn't approve of it, nor I wouldn't stand by and see the rules broke. Because right is right and wrong is wrong, and a body ain't got no business doing wrong when he ain't ignorant and knows better. It might answer for you to dig Jim out with a pick without letting on, because you don't know no better, but it wouldn't be for me because I do know better. Give me a case knife. He had his own by him, but I handed him mine. He flung it down and says, give me a case knife. I didn't know just what to do, but then I thought. I scratched around amongst the old tools and got a pickaxe and gave it to him, and he took it and went to work and never said a word. He was always just that particular, full of principle. There's the first part of number 11 about how they're solving the difficulties of these case knives are going to take forever. So what are they doing instead? Here comes the second part. So then I got a shovel, and we picked and shoveled, turned about, and made the fur fly. We stuck to it about half an hour, which was as long as we could stand up. But we had a good deal of a hole to show for it. When I got upstairs, I looked out at the window to see Tom doing his level best with the lightning rod, but he couldn't come to it. His hands was so sore. At last he says, it ain't no use. It can't be done. What do you reckon I better do? Can't you think up no way? Yes, I says, but I reckon it ain't regular. Come up the stairs and let on it's a lightning rod. So he done it. And there's the second part of number 11. Next day, Tom stole a pewter spoon and a brass candlestick in the house to make some pens for Jim out of, and 6 tallow candles, and I hung around the N-word cabins and laid for a chance and stole 3 tin plates. Tom said it wasn't enough, but I said nobody would never see the plates that Jim throwed out because they'd fall on the dog fennel and Jimson weeds under the window hole, and then we could tote them back and say we could use them over again. So Tom was satisfied. Then he says, now, the thing to study out is how to get the things to Jim. We'll just take them in through the hole, I says, when we get it done. He only just looked scornful and said something about nobody ever heard of such an idiotic idea, and then he went to studying. By and by, he said he had ciphered out 2 or 3 ways, but there weren't no need to decide on any of them yet. Said we've got to post Jim first. That night, we went down the lightning rod a little after 10 and took one of the candles along and listened under the window hole and heard Jim snoring, so we pitched it in and didn't wake him. Then we whirled in with the pick and the shovel, and in about 2 hours and a half, the job was done. We crept in under Jim's bed and into the cabin and pawed around and found the candle and lit it and stood over Jim a while and found him looking hearty and healthy, and then we woke him up gentle and gradual. He was so glad to see us, he most cried and called us honey and all the pet names he could think of, and was for having us hunt up a cold chisel to cut the chain off his leg with right away and clearing out without losing any time. But Tom, he showed him how unregular it would be and sat down and told him all about our plans and how we could alter them in a minute anytime there was an alarm and not to be the least afraid because we would see that he got away, sure. So Jim said it was all right, and we sat there and talked over our old times a while, and then Tom asked a lot of questions, and when Jim told him Uncle Silas come in every day or two to pray with him, and Aunt Sally to come in and see if he was comfortable and had plenty to eat, and both of them was as kind as they can be. Tom says, now I know how to fix it. We'll send you some things by them. I said, don't do nothing of the kind. It's one of the most jackass ideas I ever struck. But he never paid no attention to me. Went right on. It was his way when he got his plan set. So he told Jim how we'd have to smuggle in the rope ladder pie and the other large things by Nat, the N-word that fed him, and he must be on the lookout and not be surprised and not let Nat see him open them. And we would put small things in Uncle's coat's pockets, and he must steal them out. And we would tie things to Aunt's apron strings or put them in her apron pocket if we got a chance, and told him what they would be and what they was for, and told him how to keep a journal on the shirt with his blood and all that. He told him everything. Jim, he couldn't see no sense in the most of it, but he allowed we was white folks and knowed better than him. So he was satisfied and said he would do it all just as Tom said. Here's number 12, which can be read as a little bit controversial unless you think that Jim actually has a lot more going on than what's on the page. Jim had plenty corncob pipes and tobacco, so we had a right down good sociable time. We crawled out through the hole and so home to bed with hands that looked like they'd been chawed by a dog. Tom was in high spirits. He said it was the best fun he had ever had in his life and the most intellectual, and said if he could only see his way to it, we would keep it up all the rest of our lives and leave Jim to our children to get out, for he believed Jim would come to like it better and better the more he got used to it. He said that in a way that could be strung out as much as 80 a year, and it would be the best time on record. And he said it would make us all celebrated that had a hand in it. In the morning, we went out to the woodpile and chopped up the brass candlestick into handy sizes, and Tom put them and the pewter spoon in his pocket. Then we went to the N-word cabins, and while I got Nat's notice off, Tom shoved a piece of candlestick in the middle of a corn pone that was in Jim's pan, and we went along with Nat to see how it would work, and it just worked noble. When Jim bit into it, most mashed all his teeth out, and then there weren't ever anything could have worked better. Tom said so himself. Jim, he never let on, but what it was only just a piece of rock or something, like that's always getting into bread, you know. But after that, he never bit into nothing, but what he jabbed his fork into it 3 or 4 places first. There's number 13 about why Jim can't just eat his food because of Tom's insane plan. And whilst we was a-standing there in the dimmish light, here comes a couple of the hounds bulging in from under Jim's bed, and they kept on piling in till there was 11 of them, and there weren't hardly room in there to get your breath. By jings, we forgot to fasten that lean-to door. The N-word Nat, he only just hollered, "Witches!" once, and keeled over onto the floor amongst the dogs and began to groan like he was dying. Tom jerked the door open and flung out a slab of Jim's meat, and the dogs went for it, and in 2 seconds he was out himself and back again and shut the other door, and I know he fixed the other door too. So the poor Nat thinks there's witches because the dogs just like come up from under the bed. He doesn't know there's a hole that goes to the lean-to next door, and that's the hounds smelled food and came in and came up under the hole under the bed, like as if from nowhere. Then he went to work on the N-word, coaxing him and petting him and asking him if he'd been imagining he saw something again. Poor guy. He raised up and blinked his eyes around and says, "Moss Sid, you say I was a fool, but if I don't believe I see most 1,000,000 dogs or devils or something, I wish I may die right here in these tracks. I did most surely, Moss Sid. I felt 'em, sir. They was all over me, Dad. Fetch it, I just wish I could get my hands on one of them witches just once. Only just once. It's all I'd asked. But mostly I wish they'd let me alone, I does." Tom says, "Well, I'll tell you what I think. What makes them come here just at this runaway N-word's breakfast time? It's 'cause they're hungry, that's the reason. You make them a witch pie, that's the thing for you to do." "But my land, Moss Sid, how's I going to make them into a witch pie? I don't know how to make it. I ain't ever heard of such a thing before." "Well, then I'll have to make it myself." "Will you do it, honey? Will you? I worship the ground under your foot, I will." "All right, I'll do it, seeing it's you, and you've been good to us and showed us the runaway N-word. But you got to be mighty careful. We come around, you turn your back, and then whatever we put in the pan, don't you let on you see it at all. And don't you look when Jim unloads the pan. Something might happen. I don't know what. And above all, don't you handle the witch things." "Handle them, Moss Sid? What are you talking about? I wouldn't lay the weight of my finger on them, not for 1,400,000 billion dollars. I wouldn't." There is number 14 and the end of chapter 37. Thanks a lot. Or 36, excuse me.